Well, I didn't want to drone on.
That was good. So our next title here is The Rise of the Arab American Left, Activist Allies and Their Fight Against Imperialism and Racism from the 1960s to the 1980s by Pamela E. Pennock. And this is a title that comes from University of North Carolina Press. And looks like it's covering a lot in terms of the substance of the various parts. So the first part looks at the impact of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War on Arab-American organizing in the American left. The second section looks at a hostile climate for activism. And part 3 looks at Americanization of activism, local organizing, and national integration. And each of these is made up of about 3 or 2 different chapters. I won't go through the individual chapter titles, but it's clear that it's looking at progressive activism and its intersections with Arab students, in particular in the early stages, and then later with community organizations and institutions. So clearly looking more at the history of Arab immigration to the United States and over time kind of assimilation and development of both identity politics and also kind of various activism models.
The front cover is actually really interesting of this book. It's from a some sort of operation, and you could tell from the haircuts in the 70s. It actually is praised by Akram Khater, who I think still edits the Journal of Middle East Studies, and Paul Spickard, who is at University of California. Of course, Akram Khater is also director of the Khairallah Center and author of Inventing Home. The importance, I think, of this book is the emphasis on the sort of early part of activism in the United States, which stretches from the 60s to the 80s, which now you are seeing some sort of a revamping of. Unfortunately, the resurgence of Arab left activism has been mired in all sorts of controversy and polemics that involve the responses to the Arab uprisings. And that is not just a problem of schisms within the left. It's actually an epistemological or a political epistemological problem, because now we are figuring out who actually is part of the left and who is just trying to use certain occasions, including certain really problematic positions on the Arab uprisings, to sort of out others as not being part of the left, or to sort of literally trash the left, assuming that they are still on the left, which speaks a lot to why a book like this is important, because it looks at the genealogy of this sort of development. So I will leave it up to my colleagues to say more, but I definitely hope that this book gets the attention it should get, especially in looking back at 20, 30, 40 years ago, at the sort of critiques and counter-critiques we are seeing today surrounding the left. Nadya, any comments?
You know, without having read and without necessarily endorsing the book, but I think it would be very interesting, 2 things. I think it would be very interesting to read it alongside and sort of in between a book like Sarah Gualtieri's Making Arabs White, which looks at the making of the Arab American community, or making of mostly Syrian immigrants at the turn of the 20th century in the U.S. white through Supreme Court cases. And then at the other end of the spectrum, Nadine Naber's book, also on Arab American activism, but a much more contemporary sort of, I think, post 9/11 book, if I'm not mistaken, post 9/11 period, if I'm not mistaken. And the second thing would be to go back to the point that you made, Bassam, that I think it would be really interesting if perhaps the sort of generate different generations of, to use this term loosely for a moment, activists within the Arab American communities actually read this book and understood the kind of history that they're emerging from. Like what kind of impact would that make on the way that they think or don't think about reinventing the wheel? That is, it is.
Khalid, do you have any comments on the book? Since no one read it, it's not like